Hello, class. I hope all of you had a nice weekend. I know it was a tough weekend. All right, rained most of the time, so it was definitely tough to get outside. But hopefully, you were able to get outside a little bit in between that rain. All right, get some fresh air. I hope you and your families are healthy and safe during this time. And to get started today, I want to make a few announcements before we begin taking notes on where we left off on Friday. Okay, first thing is, after this video, make sure you complete the Chapter 9, Section 2 worksheet and get that back to me through Schoology. Some of you still have not submitted assignments in Schoology, right, and your grade right now is a 0. Okay, if you were to go into your history class in Schoology, go to Gradebook, you will see the assignments there that I put a 0. You need to submit those assignments to me to get credit for them. Please do that as soon as possible at this point. Okay, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. All right, and then on Wednesday this week, all right, last announcement before notes. On Wednesday this week, we are going to start going over your trimester exam. I'm going to send the trimester exam through to you guys in Schoology, and we will start reviewing that through Explain Everything videos as well as conferencing. Okay, and those are my kind of housekeeping remarks to you guys, all right, to kind of keep you on track and where we're headed today and this week in history. All right, tomorrow we'll conference. Today you have this video here, and then Wednesday video, Thursday conference, all right, and Friday you'll have another video. All right, so with that said, okay, if you can take out your notes on your iPad, or if you're viewing this video on your iPad, and split screen the notes alongside this video, all right, and we're going to pick up with Roman religion, okay, and section 2 we've been talking about what was daily life during the Roman Empire, and we haven't talked about the Roman religion very much in these past 2 chapters, all right, and the Romans at first, before Catholicism spread throughout Rome, they were polytheistic. They believed in many gods, and they adopted their religion, if you could think back to chapter 8, all right, from the Greeks. All right, the Greeks heavily influenced the Roman religion, all right, and the Romans basically just took the Greek gods and goddesses, which were very popular, and gave them different names. For example, Zeus to the Romans was known as Jupiter, all right, the sky god. Aphrodite, which is a Greek goddess, was known as Venus, and Jupiter and Venus may sound familiar. Yes, the planets are named after Roman gods. Okay, so the planets that make up our solar system are all named after Roman gods. And when Augustus became imperator, all the emperors after him were kind of worshipped as if they were gods. They were viewed as people that had a close connection to the gods, and the Romans built temples, all right, to honor each of their gods. They built temples and monuments for their emperors, which also strengthened the support of the Roman Empire. But eventually the Roman Empire came into conflict with other religions, kind of beginning after Jesus' death, which brought a lot of Christians into the empire, right? And there was also, Judaism, which existed within the Roman Empire, and even some other religions as well, like Zoroastrianism. All right, but Christianity, a lot of people were very fearful of Christians, so the Christians were persecuted throughout the Roman Empire, and eventually, as we'll talk about later on in Section 3, there is an emperor that makes Christianity the official religion, and the Roman Catholic Church is established. All right, so know from this slide at first the Romans were polytheistic. Okay, know that the Greeks, okay, that is important to know. Basically, the Romans get their religion from the Greeks, and they just renamed them. All right, you don't really need to know any specific Roman gods. We're not going to go through them, but it's important to know that the Roman religion was influenced by the Greek religion. So there's a crossover between these 2 cultures. Then eventually Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire towards the end. All right, but make sure you get all these notes down. All right, I'll give you a second or two to finish copying, and then we're going to move on to the next slide. If you miss anything, you can always pause the video at this point and get the notes, or rewatch the video again. Alright, so another important aspect of Roman culture is artwork. Alright, and the Greeks, just like they influenced the Roman religion, they're gonna be the chief people. They're gonna be the big influencers in Roman art. Alright, the Romans, learned the art of sculpture from the Greeks. Alright, specifically sculpting. Okay, and that box there, should be an arrow. Right, these boxes should both be arrows. Okay. One difference between Roman sculptures and Greek sculptures was that Roman statues, when they constructed a statue, it was much more realistic than the Greeks. For example, if a Roman sculpture, was to make a statue of myself, or let's say Mr. Brennan, a Roman sculpture would make a statue showing Mr. Brennan as you would see him if you were going to class every day. They would show his receding hairline. They would show his belly that hangs over his belt a little bit. They would show how the top button in his suit looks like it's going to pop because his neck is so thick. If a Greek, that's how a Roman sculpture would make a statue of Mr. Brennan, exactly what you guys see on a regular basis. The pimple on his nose every day, everything. Okay, but the Greek sculpture would show Mr. Brennan, looking like Hercules. Okay, perfectly fit, muscular, perfect, beautiful set of hair, no gray hair. He would look perfect. Okay, but the Romans would show people would try and make statues of people exactly as they looked on a regular basis. Okay, and the Romans used art and relied on art for education as well. One very important style of Roman artwork that has kind of been passed down from generation to generation is mosaics, which are pictures of designs made by setting small pieces of stone or glass, painted stone or glass or tile onto a surface. An example of a mosaic at Kellenberg is in the cafeteria. In the back of the cafeteria you have the big picture of the Firebird and the picture that says "One Heart, One Mind." Those are examples of mosaics, all right? Or you can see here to the right, that is an example of a mosaic going back to Roman times. And the best examples of Roman painting, and painting that existed and was made during this time, can be found in the city of Pompeii. And I'm not sure if you guys heard about the city of Pompeii, but in around the year AD 70, Mount Vesuvius, which is a volcano in Italy, erupted and covered the entire city in ash. And that ash, covered people's homes. It covered people. People, basically drowned in the ash, covered people's furniture, artifacts, personal belongings, and hundreds of years later, archaeologists went digging in Pompeii to see what has been left behind, and they have found a lot of Roman paintings that were perfectly intact because they were kind of buried perfectly intact under this volcanic ash that covered the entire city. All right, and that's where a lot of famous Roman artwork, not all of Roman paintings are from, but some of the best examples of Roman painting can be found in that city. All right, so that's important to know. All right, and you'll need to know that, for the trimester exam, which we'll start reviewing on Wednesday. All right, another second or two on this slide, then we're going to move on to talking about Roman literature. All right, so some works of Roman literature you need to know. All right, the first work of Roman literature you need to know is the Aeneid. All right, the Aeneid was kind of like the sequel to the Trojan War. All right, Virgil spent 10 years writing this famous work of Latin literature, and it's modeled after the Greek epic The Iliad, written by Homer. Virgil basically tells stories of how the Trojans' prince, Paris, arrived on Italy and created this new civilization that eventually became known as the Romans. All right, very famous Roman historian you need to know is Livy. All right, he's known to be one of the best historians from this time period. He wrote a book, The History of Rome, in 10 BC, which talks a lot about Rome's rise to power, beginning in 509 BC. All right, the Roman Republic. All right, he actually goes back to, Livy tells us this from Livy. Romans and people today learned the story of Romulus and Remus going back to 753 BC. Then Livy talks about the rise of the Republic, the rise of the Roman Empire, and Livy believed in writing history because he thought history has important moral lessons to teach people, and he did use a lot of legends to create more of a national myth of Rome. Right, so not all of Livy's book is entirely accurate. Only most of it is, but there's a good portion of it that is based on legends that are not necessarily true. So that's why there's a lot of myth behind the history of Rome. All right, because a lot of what was written down from that time comes from Livy and a few other historians. But the historian you need to know, a very famous Roman historian, was Livy. All right, he's the one that tells us a lot about Julius Caesar, all right, a lot about Augustus, and some of the other early Roman emperors. Okay, very famous Roman historian. All right, so I'll give you a couple seconds to copy down this slide, and then we'll move on to the next slide. All right, the next aspect of Roman culture we're going to talk about is the language. All right, this you guys will become very knowledgeable with over the course of the next 2 years after this year. All right, 7th and 8th grade, you'll be taking Latin, all right, which will definitely go a long way for you guys. All right, I took Latin for 2 years in a Latin school, and even at my age, I still remember some of the terms, all right, that I had to learn. And Latin, okay, is important to understand because for over close to 1,000 years, maybe a little bit more than, well more than 1,000 years, Latin, right, was the language of Europe, right? Latin was Rome's language, right? It was used over the course, going back to the days when the Etruscans first conquered Rome from the Latins, right? That's what those original inhabitants of Rome, the language the original inhabitants of Rome spoke. And even after the Roman Empire collapsed and was taken over by different Germanic tribes, it was Europe's language for government, trade, and learning all the way to the year AD 1500, into the 1500s. All right, if you were studying in school, if you were studying history, if you were studying science, you studied all of those subjects in Latin. Imagine, if you guys had to take all those subjects that you guys are listening to either in videos or in conferences in Latin. All your textbooks were in Latin. All right, and Latin is the basis of many modern languages today. All right, English doesn't come from Latin, but there's a lot of English words that cross over with Latin, which is why it's important to understand Latin and learn Latin. All right, but languages like Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, Italian, those languages, French, all have Latin roots. All right, those languages were created from Latin. Those languages are closest to the language that the Romans spoke. Okay, and Latin was the official language of the church all the way into the 1900s. All right, maybe when your grandparents were going to church, they could tell you stories of how the entire Mass was in Latin and you responded in Latin. The same way how at the end of every school Mass that we have, or maybe you've been tuning into some of the Masses that Kellenberg has been putting on their website, we always end Mass with the Salve Regina, which is a Latin phrase that the church used to say going back to the days. Blessed William Joseph Chaminade was living in France and having Mass with other Marinists. Okay, so you are familiar with Latin hymns that have been said for thousands of years. All right, so the Latin language has a major impact not just on the history of Rome, but also the history of Europe and the history of our church and society today. All right, so make sure you get this down. The big thing from this slide, all right, is know that Latin was the official language of the Roman Empire. That's the language that everyone spoke. There were people that spoke other languages within the Roman Empire, just like there's people in the United States that speak other languages besides English, but English is the primary language of our country. Okay, Latin was the primary language of the Roman Empire. All right, a couple more seconds to get the notes down on this slide, and we're going to move on to the next slide, all right, the last slide of section 2. All right, and the last slide of section 2 is on Roman architecture. All right, and we see evidence of Roman architecture in our society today. All right, some homes in your neighborhood may have Roman architectural style to it. If you've ever been to Washington, D.C., the Lincoln Memorial, the Jefferson Memorial, the Washington Monument, the White House, the Capitol Building, all of those structures have Roman engineering, architectural style to it. Even places in New York City have Roman architectural style. All right, and the Romans, engineers and architects, were known to have perfected the use of arches in building structures, domes, and concrete. All right, the Romans were the first ones to ever invent concrete. All right, so maybe your driveway was paved in concrete, or you have a patio in concrete, or you see those big cement mixing trucks. All right, that's like my son's favorite truck. He goes ecstatic anytime we're in the car and he sees one of those. All right, but those trucks that produce concrete, the Romans were the first ones to invent and develop that material. And they're going to use it to build a lot of structures, such as the Roman Colosseum and the Pantheon, which are two very magnificent buildings that the Romans constructed. Okay, the Romans used arches to build bridges and aqueducts. All right, aqueducts were human-made channels, all right, that the Romans would use to transport water throughout their empire. All right, the aqueducts would be used to carry water from the hills into the cities. All right, they would have public baths for men and women that they could use. All right, and if you're wealthy enough, you can have aqueducts built into your private homes. Okay, definitely know they're the first people to invent and use concrete, all right, which allowed them to build structures taller, made them more sturdier. And definitely know the Colosseum and the Pantheon are two important buildings, two very famous ancient buildings constructed by the Romans. Right? The Colosseum, which we've already spent a lot of time talking about, and the Pantheon, which unfortunately, if we were in class, I can show you some computer-generated images of what the Pantheon looks like. Okay, what's magnificent about this temple is it is still intact, and you can see the huge dome structure that kind of tops the Pantheon, and basically the top of the Pantheon looks very similar to what the top of our Capitol building looks like, except for the little statue on top. All right, but what I've highlighted is what you need to know from this slide. Okay, and this is the last slide of section 2. This is the last slide that'll help you complete the worksheet that is due by the start of class tomorrow. Okay, I am going to start section 3 in this video. All right, so we're not finished yet. Okay, we have one more slide today. I know this video might be a little bit longer than previous videos, but I do want to make sure we get this chapter done on Wednesday, so that way we can spend time just reviewing work from the trimester, all right, from material from the trimester. Alrighty? So, a couple seconds on this slide. I'll let you guys copy it down, and then we'll move on to the last slide for today. Alright, so we are going to start Chapter 9, Section 3, which is the collapse of the Roman Empire. And Chapter 9, Section 3 basically picks up where we left off in Chapter 9, Section 1. Alright, so Marcus Aurelius, who was the last good emperor, considered to be the last emperor of the Pax Romana, his son, Commodus, becomes emperor. And if you've ever seen the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe, it is rated R, so most of you haven't seen it, but I'm sure some of you have. Commodus was the emperor, the name of the emperor in that movie. Okay, so that person, and Marcus Aurelius was in that movie as well. So Commodus becomes emperor, and Commodus was nothing like his father. He was much more harsh or cruel. He wasted tax dollars, right, money that people paid to the Roman Imperator. And he had this passion for these gladiator games to the point where he himself spent time fighting as a gladiator. All right, it would be like Donald Trump deciding to play golf every day and instead of trying to solve this pandemic crisis of the coronavirus going on within our country. If people knew Donald Trump was playing golf every day when other people are not allowed to play golf because some golf courses actually shut down because of this, people would be outraged, right? And that's kind of what happened with people within the Roman Empire. They didn't like Commodus. He was cruel. He would arrange the gladiatorial games to the point where he would always win, so he wouldn't die. And in AD 192, his athletic trainer, the person that trained him to fight other gladiators, killed him. Right? And after Commodus, a group of emperors, a dynasty of emperors known as the Severans, ruled Rome for a number of years. All right, and they were able to keep the Roman Empire intact. They paid the army well to stay in power, all right, but they never solved the growing problems of crime and poverty on kind of the outskirts of Rome. So outside of Italy, there was a lot of crime and poverty taking place. There was invasions by Germanic peoples, or basically what the Romans called barbarians. And this is pretty much the beginning of the end for the Roman Empire, right? And we will talk about the 5 major causes to the Roman Empire tomorrow when we conference, okay? So this is the last slide for today. Make sure you get all of this down. Commodus is an emperor you're going to need to know. All right, definitely know. All right, the description you'll need to know about him is that he was an emperor that enjoyed these gladiatorial games so much that he himself spent time fighting as a gladiator, okay, and eventually he was killed in AD 192, okay, and Commodus's time as imperator, as emperor, is the end of the Pax Romana, so the 200-year period of peace and prosperity that started with Augustus ended with the death of Marcus Aurelius, okay, and that's the beginning of the collapse of the Roman Empire, which, like I said, in our conference tomorrow, we'll start the 5 causes to the fall of the Roman Empire. Now, just one reminder, make sure you complete the Chapter 9, Section 2 worksheet, and get that back to me through Schoology, okay, and I hope all of you have a nice day, enjoy the rest of your classes, and I look forward to conferencing with you guys again tomorrow. Have a good day.